Hi, everyone. Welcome to UK Games Expo. I'm joined by Will Shick. Thank you to be here.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on this beautiful Sunday of Games Expo.
Yeah, just getting ready to wrap up and start winding down.
We got like a full day. It's 9 o'clock. We still have a full day show, so we got a lot to pack into it. But yeah, and tonight we'll tear it all down and come back next year.
Yeah, it's been a busy week.
It's been great. I mean, the show's been phenomenal. This is my first UKGE that I've been at. It's just been spectacular. I've had a blast.
Yeah, Diete's first one too. It wasn't a show when I left, so coming back is my triumphant return.
Yeah. Well, it's excellent year to come back and just view everything and
Yeah,
as opposed to really become something huge.
yeah, it's quite a show. I really enjoyed it. Definitely going to be coming back next year, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Oh, I hope so. I have no control over where they send me. They just kind of tell me where I'm going and then I go. But I think I know Ross is really keen to get back here. We see a lot of potential, overall, like the show's been great and he's got a lot of ideas on how to grow it. So I have every confidence that I will be back.
Yeah.
But I don't get to make my own destiny.
Oh, well, that's good. It's good to sometimes giving up control, let the force guide you.
Exactly.
All of the cliches.
I got a lot of other things that I have to make decisions on. So deciding where I'm traveling, not being one of them, is kind of nice.
Yeah. So we do have the GT going on for Star Wars Legion at the moment. For you notice any like meta developments or anything that you've been surprised by now, like 6 weeks out or so from the update?
I haven't done a deep dive on all the list yet for this event. What I've seen walking through the hall and kind of not trying to interrupt players as they're deep in thought and all of that stuff, it looks pretty much like the meta has still been settled. However, I will say that the results of the World Team Championship, which just concluded week and a half, 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
I think that has had a dramatic impact on the overall discussion.
Yeah.
Especially, with all these 6-ad clone lists,
Yeah.
utilizing the larger squads, things that people in the community, some people in the community and discourse were like, I don't think that this actually is functional. And obviously low activation counts in Legion have always been a thing that's been hotly debated as to whether it's viable or not.
Yeah.
So I think that one more than anything will have a large ripple effect, but I think we're a little too soon.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you saw that list, you're like, oh my gosh, this might be a wave of the future. Changing your whole approach a week before or a week and a half before to UKG is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a finesse list. You better really manage those passes and the activation orders. There's a lot that goes into moving parts of it.
But I know a lot of the players on that winning WTC team are here.
Yeah.
I had the chance to actually meet Ollie in person, face to face, for a little bit during a discussion. We've crossed paths at Adepticon and stuff.
Yeah.
In the past, but I've never really had the opportunity to sit down and chat. We had a great time talking at one of the seminars about building more events in the UK. An initiative that's been done through Asmodee UK, our partners here who do the distribution and stuff. They're working with kind of an independent organization outfit to really start to ramp up tournament sport and things like that. So it was very exciting. So we got to chat a little bit and yeah, so I bet when I finally get into the list and I go back and we start talking with the devs, I would imagine they're playing similar lists here.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really exciting to see how those kind of effects go throughout the community. Pagani always says a lot on the interviews and stuff that he really believes that there's a lot of fertile ground that has yet to be explored.
Yeah.
Within the changes. And as a game developer designer, you always hope that's true, that you've given enough room for player exploration, enough room for players to be able to be surprised and to discover like some pretty wild stuff. And we were very enthused at the overall list turnout at the WTC and kind of how some of those list performs that were dark horses. We saw a dark horse candidate with the ISPs earlier at Adepticon, it took overall. Yeah. So a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at the UK games culture now here, and obviously I've had the experience of moving from North America to the UK very recently, so that the culture still seems to be very more club focused here. It doesn't really tie itself too closer to a game store. It feels different to North America. So I've got 3 different games clubs in walking distance of me house, and Wigan's not a giant city kind of thing. And they all have their own little community of what games they play. When you compare that to a North American model where generally the OP is led by store, so you have that OP kit support and it kind of flows really nicely and easily. Is that kind of a challenge for the team to come up with ways to across those
I think it's definitely always been interesting in my time in the industry overall in tabletop miniatures is, as a game studio, right, we kind of rely on distribution to be able to get things out.
Yeah.
And especially at AMG, right, because of the close relationship with Asmodee and our publisher that we have, being owned by Asmodee, that kind of stuff. We are extra reliant because we don't have any mechanisms to be able to send out kits to be able to do that kind of stuff. We're building some of that overall to try to add extra support and layers, but it really is a direct partnership with, the UK Asmodee team, with the AUSA team, with all of the other great teams in like Germany, France, Spain, those kinds of things. Learning that system, coming to an understanding of what they need, and then trying to work within the systems of the community, right? So obviously a distributor, they normally work with stores. The game club culture in Europe and especially the UK is huge. And it's always been kind of a point of like, how do we make sure that we're promoting gameplay that supports stores, right? And that's the core fundamental of all organized play. Support the local store. When you get to, like the UK, right? Like you're talking about, there are stores, but then the place where play happens that supports the stores is not in the stores.
Yeah.
So I think we've been trying really hard to figure out ways in which we find those community members, we get the access to the kits that they need so that their clubs, their communities can grow, which supports the stores, which does everything we want out of good organized play.
Yeah.
And it's definitely been a mind bender at times, right? Like there are just certain things where you're like, it doesn't fit nicely into the systems and formula that have been developed. So you have to create new ones, which then means you kind of have to break old ones. So it's a process, but I do feel like, the UKTC thing that Asmodee UK is working on is pretty inspired, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And we have high hopes for that. And then, of course, some other stuff as well that's going on. So I think we'll get there, but it definitely is. It's a slow, iterative process of trying to like figure these things out. What's best to support everybody involved.
Yeah.
Always coming back to, making sure that local game store is kind of a beating part of everything that we do, because that's obviously where people usually discover these games, get connected with gaming groups and communities, whether that's in-store, out-of-store, whatever. But yeah, the North American model to the European model, very different just based on size, space, like what's expected. And it's a fun challenge to kind of grok, and that's something that Ross works very heavily on with his marketing team as well.
Yeah, it's good. And we have something that keeps coming up over and over again as I've been kind of reintegrated into new communities. The upgrade card change, the removal of that art. So I want to dig a little bit into those kind of choices. You need something that helps with like your design process and those iterations, in that it's one less licensing thing to go through, that you've got a template, or
yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of facets to it, right? Obviously, not having art gives the developers way more freedom in terms of having a larger text box. So when you're doing multilingual stuff, right, different languages have different amount of characters.
Yeah.
And so the way in which you produce kind of black plate replacement is that you need to have a text box that's flexible, that can flow. When you fix into an art box, right, you think like a traditional CCG card that has art, or even the old upgrade cards, right, art, and then there's like this text box, but it doesn't adjust.
Yeah.
That can be challenging because when you're writing in English, for example, you can fit things that will not fit in German.
Yeah.
And you have to account for those things. And since we don't have any native German speakers on the team, one of the dangers is that you spend all this time developing, designing, playtesting this rule, you send it out, and they're like, oh, well, it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Right. And so now what do you do? Do you go back and do you like trim the rule, which may damage it? It may make it not work as well. You may have to completely reinvent it. Do you just say, well, sorry, like saying sorry, the German just won't fit, right? The German language just won't fit, doesn't work, or the French or whatever is causing, like, whatever doesn't fit that box. So it is an efficiency thing to allow us the flexibility we need to continue to develop design space, to continue to do what we want without having to worry about, necessarily character count in your rules. We absolutely want to write concise and clear rules, but in order to do that, sometimes it doesn't mean less language, it means more.
Okay, sometimes keywords only carry you so far.
And then, of course, when you talk about every piece of art, it has to get reviewed by the licensor, right? An LFL. We have to go through a lot of work in terms of making sure that we're hitting those beats, that everything is accurately representing those kinds of things and all of that. So there's a little bit of a time factor, but the primary thrust really was the multilingual flexibility of being able to ensure that we didn't put ourselves into a spot where we would have to suddenly change a game rule that we felt was good and beneficial for the game because it just simply didn't fit in all the languages. So,
Yeah. I do. So now this one's might be a little bit more broad.
Okay.
So if you need to get a chair, we can reset the sheets and do up there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like, faction identity and how it filters into like miniatures games in general. So obviously you've got more experience than just AMG. And you come through, you look at games like Shatterpoint or MCP, where you've got a really wide way of doing your list building. You don't have to follow any specific keyword for Shatterpoint or any affiliation for team leaders, that kind of thing. For Legion, you come in, obviously, when Legion launched, you only have Rebels, Imperials.
Yep.
Then we add in the Clone Wars. Then you add in the 0.5 faction. It's a mercenary faction, but it's only playable through Shadow Collective as a individual thing. So, 4.5 faction for Legion at the moment. I do want to talk a little bit about how you feel, just not necessarily specifically for Legion, but as a miniatures game in general, where that sweet point is for factions, and if Battleforce are going to factor into widening that for Legion.
Yeah, so like overall, right? I think one of the most intriguing and fun things about miniatures gaming is the personal touch that you put into it.
Yeah.
And in a faction game, in a faction army game specifically, you know, like Legion, like a Warhammer, like a 40K, part of that initial player experience and part of that choice is a foundational pick of what your army is going to be. And if you want to make that choice meaningful, right? It's not just I like the red ones, I like the blue ones, I like the orange ones. It should be, well, I like this type of play style. So what does this army do that other armies don't do? What does it do well? What does it not do well particularly? How do I as a player express my skill and my creativity through those different like bonuses and perhaps like drawbacks? And then, you know, you also look at like personality. What's the personality of the force? I think one of the things that I've seen over the years as both a player and somebody who's worked in the industry is that when you get a person who's like really interested in the games and they like, you walk them up to the wall and they have all the options, right? The best thing you can always do is just like, okay, so how do you like to play games, right? Are you a sneaky guy? Are you, you're the bold hero? Are you like the paladin? You just wade into combat, fearless of danger. Are you the aggressive barbarian who wants to run in and just murder everything? You know, are you the more strategic tactical guy? You like to control your enemies and weaken them and then come in for the perfect strike? Like, what is it that draws you to games, right? And if you can find that out, then you can really push a player towards the army or the play style that's going to really fit them, right? Yeah. Because there's nothing worse than saying, well, I like the red ones, but you as a player love just charging in willy-nilly without like any concern for anything. You just want to get in melee combat and kill everything.
Yeah.
But you find out that the red ones are actually like to hang back and plink you away at range, and they don't particularly love getting into melee and stuff. And so now you have this division between how you want to enjoy the game and how your army is telling you to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
So I think faction identity is really important to bring those unities together, right? And then the question becomes, well, you can have these faction identities, but you also want them to not be so dramatic that you wind up in a rock, paper, scissors situation, right? You do want the rock, paper, scissors feel of like they're strong picks against other picks, and then those picks are countered by other picks, right? That makes a healthy meta. But the drop off between those shouldn't be so sharp that player skill is inconsequential, right?
Yeah.
If you get into a bad matchup, just like when we talk about game balance in general and internal balance, when you get into that bad matchup, what we want the separation between good match and bad match to be so close that player skill is the maximum defining effort, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be luck. There's always going to be table setup. There's external factors that players just have to mitigate for. But player skill should absolutely be a core facet of, okay, I'm in a bad matchup. How do I overcome it?
Yeah.
Right? And can I overcome? Do I feel confident in overcoming it? And as long as you feel like you have a chance, if you play well and maybe a couple of dice rolls go your way, I think that's great. And that's kind of what you're looking for. So you want that difference to be smooth, right? It's not rock always beats scissors. It's more like rock has a small, like maybe a 10% advantage, a 5% advantage over scissors, right? And you can make up the difference between other things. When you look at like Star Wars Legion, right? One of the big things that we've wanted to do and have continued to work towards, and we're not there yet. I think, the idea that you can flip a switch and all of a sudden you have faction identity just baked in to a game that's as complex, as deep, as interesting as Legion is, that's kind of folly, right? But you can start to like really push towards these things. You can add new elements, right? With the redesign and the rebalances of a lot of the units, we started to implement some of these characteristics. There were some things that were very visible, right? Like clones getting the leader slot,
Yeah.
where they now have more flexibility and the ability to like customize their squads and what they want to do and those powers. You have kind of emergent things with the Empire, in terms of how they use suppression, how they, we're trying to get them into this militaristic, like heavy force that just kind of inexorably marches forward and like grinds you into dust.
Yeah.
They beat you down through heavy fire and that kind of things. And that's the goal, right? But I'm not claiming that we're there yet, but we're moving in those directions.
Sorry.
And these are the things that we're constantly thinking about, right? Having that faction identity as a designer and developer lets you go, okay, I have this idea for a unit. And then you can kind of like check it against those things and say, does this unit advance that? Maybe the unit is designed to smooth over some of the deficiencies in the army. So you say, okay, if you really have a bad matchup, we can add this part in, right? If you say, well, the entire army is supposed to be like this close range melee force, but we know the game needs some range. So we'll give this unit that's kind of a unique unit within the overall identity that has some range. And then your job is to make sure that that unit just doesn't override the identity, right? So you make sure that it's limited or that it's maybe slightly more expensive than another option, those types of things. And that's where granular points costing comes in too. You could have an army that has melee troops that are really, really efficient and they're cheap in that army because that's their identity.
Yeah.
Versus in another army where their identity isn't that, but they do want that option that might be a couple more points or a few more points more expensive because it's a specialty, right? It's not what the thing does. Battle forces to me are really where we get to like, they're really the moments at the time, the current point in the game where we're talking now, where we get to really dive into an identity, right? And I think if you look at how so far most of the battle forces have been, that's kind of the vision that we want to push towards overall, right? We want even the generalized factions to have kind of a battle force feel of identity, of function, of form. When you look at it, you say, okay, I understand what this is and it feels right.
Yeah.
So the Star Wars galaxy and the media that we see within them, doing that with the whole faction, of course, that's a lot of work and it takes quite a bit of time to like integrate that stuff in. And then you also want to be careful because again, your generalized faction should be able to fill many shoes, right? You want to have it to be able to do those kinds of things. So I think Battle Forces for me, and I know for the dev team, they're very fun to work on because you really get to zoom in and say, okay, this is what this Battle Force does. And you kind of get to put the blinders on and block everything else out. So you're like, we're going to do Sheik Defenders. It's the Wookiee, Battle Force. Great. Let's just hammer that home and we can make that theme crazy.
Yeah.
Or you do the EXD, Battle Force and you're like, all right, what do we want to focus on? Well, the focus of that force really is about the unique snails and the unique Magna Guards. And there's some other cool stuff that goes on with that, like the mechanic where, you can spend the EXD tokens to get benefits and things like that. And that was a bit of a test case for some ideas that we had just generally for how the droids could function and all of that. We put that into the Battle Force and you get that really strong feeling, right? So those things to me are very fun. I think they really showcase the idea behind an identity.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a faction identity, but an army identity. And one of the fun things with the mercenaries and like Shadow Collective being kind of the first mercenary battle force that combines these things. Ewoks to a lesser extent, they're also more mercenary than they're rebels, but we think of them as rebels, right? And I think that's absolutely fair. You could slot them either way. That one also showcases how you can create all of these different feels within a larger faction, doing these different things, taking different elements from within your overall subset, mixing them up, adding special rules, also changing how some units work in order to more maximize the identity. In the end, it's a lot of fun, and I really like it. But core philosophy and design is always, you want each faction to play different. You want it to be a choice. The first choice you make as a player should be which faction do I want to play. Not just because I like the characters, not just because I like the look, but also because hopefully the playstyle resonates with you.
Yeah. So I see, like, you have, obviously, as you took Bright Tree there, and you have Shadow Collective. Those are the two where you have units available that are only playable to that battle force. Everything else, like Beers, you can just use them in a normal Empire army, or it can be commanding your Blizzard force.
Yeah.
Is it possible that that's something to explore more?
I think so. I mean, as the game grows and expands, right? Within the factions themselves, you're probably only going to see alternate versions of units that already can be taken outside the battle force, right? I can't imagine that we would make a rebel unit that only works within a battle force.
And you got APSD Chewy, you know.
You do. And then of course it's like, is that rebel? Is it, but again, that one's kind of unique in terms of rebels because it says, okay, you take this Empire miniature,
Yeah,
and you can put it into a rebel / mercenary battle force. But that Empire miniature still is usable outside of the battle force, just in Empire, right?
A very unique case
And so
to do it right.
And so that one is definitely kind of pushing, I think, the boundaries of, are we comfortable with that? And it was a test case. And overall, it's been very well, I think it's been very popular within the community, the idea of being able to do this. I love the concept that the rebels are stealing, other people's vehicles and reutilize them, because that's what a guerrilla force does, right? That's what a rebellion does. They capture things and they use enemy equipment because they don't have the funding and resources necessarily to get their own, no matter how well funded the rebellion is, right? So I hope we get to explore that concept more, especially for rebels. I think that's another unique rebel, even if it isn't an overall faction identity in the general army. The idea that there are different battle forces that can steal different vehicles from different things. Maybe they find like an old saber tank from the Clone Wars and they rebuild it and they can use it, or stuff like that. To me, that's really cool.
Avenger.
Yeah, or gets a prototype TIE Avenger and he's flying around causing problems. I think those kind of concepts, right? Again, that goes back to the overall feel of the faction. When you say, well, yeah, so the rebels are, they're scrappy and all this, but their battle forces are really interesting because they have several that can steal units from other factions to show that they're appropriating resources.
Yes, CATRT, right? That was originally, it was released in the first Carbot.
Yeah.
And it is a repurposed Republic vehicle.
Yeah, and I mean, they're Y-Wing, right? The Y-Wing is classically a Republic vehicle that was stripped down and taken over. We see that happen in Rebels. So I think those kind of concepts are really neat, but I can't imagine, personally, here's a brand new Rebel unit. It's for Rebels, and it only works in this one way in this battle force, and you can't take it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future, that's a place we get to. As the game continues to grow and we start to really hone into these different sub-faction identities. But for right now, right, I think the goal always in our minds is we can provide unique units that are based on current units. We can maybe get away with doing things like, when it makes sense for the faction, of borrowing units from other armies. But we want to keep that limited, because we don't, at the end of the day, right, we don't want players to feel forced to get things that they may not want in order to be able to play the game, right?
It's a very different feel from coming from a Games Workshop background into a vast majority of different Legions games. When you first started playing Legion, when there was only the car box and the base,
right?
It was that FFG living card game mentality of gotta catch it all.
Yeah.
I can run 6 of these or buy 6 hordes of this. And now I think I approach Legion now as a normal traditional miniatures game where I sit and I'm like, what feel do I want to feel? I've already mentioned what play style do I want, what fits that the best, and then I kind of make the list, and maybe I'll have a couple of units that I'll slot in and out. But the example I used to use that now would transpose over onto Legion is like, I'll buy maybe 1,200 points to have a rotatable 1,000-point army, and I'll play every faction or as many as you want to.
Right.
Do the same with Battleforces. I have Imperials that are only ever going to be painted to be in my Blizzard Force.
Right.
And they're all snowy and converted.
Yeah.
All that stuff. And then if I do Tempest Force, they got Bumblebee, and they got other people to do this, but I'll buy 3 more ATSTs and I've got 1, so I know I have 4, but making them feel like distinct forces is part of the fun for me.
And I think, I think that's the magic of the hobby, right? If you're a hobbyist and you enjoy the hobby, right? You enjoy painting, you enjoy converting and modeling and those types of things, right? There's a strong contingent of that. Dallas Kemp, our creative director, he has 3 or 4 different subsets of each faction that he's done. Like with clones, he has his Lucky 13th, and then he has his other clones, and he will continue to go through and he builds an army, right? But to him, it's not the rebel army, it's not the Republic army. It is, I'm building this army for this, and it's a creative kind of cohesive thing, and then he'll move on to the other thing. And you have players who do that, and then you have players who are like, I'm gonna build out my army and have all the different options and plug and play.
Yeah.
And each play style, it just depends on what you value and what you want to get out of the hobby. And I think that's the other wonderful thing about it. And this does go back to faction identity is at the end of the day, miniatures games, war games, they're personal endeavors, right?
Yeah.
They're expressions of your creativity, both in how you paint, how you model, how you play. And we're always kind of thinking about, okay, how do we maximize that for the different types of player?
Yeah.
For the folks who want to really dive in, do a customized hobby project, those who want to play overall. And the expansion of the game only makes that choice better and more meaningful, right? So I think that's really cool too. You talk about whenever a game launches, right? You get there are only so many products for it. There are only so many options. And you're just like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing this. But as a game gets to continue to grow and spread its wings and becomes more diverse and spread out, that's when you really get to see player creativity and how they approach it, how they do things. And I think that's a very exciting time where we are with Legion, especially is that, we've hit this kind of critical mass of there are a lot of different ways to play. And with the rebalance and everything else, there's a lot of new ground to explore ideally. And so hopefully we'll start to really see that creativity from players and from hobbyists. And we'll get to continue to add to that both with new units and with new battle forces and with new faction identity and that kind of stuff. So that's always the goal is we wanted to make it constantly fun and exciting to be playing in that world, right? To be playing in the game.
It's kind of moving on to my Shatterpoint question. I told you I had one.
All right, we got one. Yeah.
I'm kind of relearning the game and kind of getting back into it now. And I'm doing that thing I said about where I'm trying to plan what I want to get. And when you talk about the faction identity, obviously you've got the keyword.
Yes.
And there's a limited number of boxes where you have Spectre Cell, or you get the Rebels, whose 3 boxes fits perfectly, good to go. Then you have stuff like Clone Force 99, where it's not quite, you've got to put something else in there. And there's quite a few, I was looking at Dathomir as a keyword, or Night Sisters, where I can't quite get the full strike team. I can get one team, but not the full double squads. Is that kind of a deliberate design to 4 feels like the sweet spot if you're aiming for theme? You get to 4 models relatively easily almost.
So yeah, overall, right? What we try to do with the Shatterpoint keywords and those types of things, sometimes we know we have a really strong plan. We're like clone troopers, right? We know that that's going to utilize a lot. We have a lot of plans and places to put it. Dathomirian was something that we know it makes sense for the characters that we initially designed with Dathomirian. And then it gives us potential in the future to explore that further.
Yeah.
So what we do in terms of trying to develop and think about those things is that typically if it's a keyword that gets utilized, because there are some keywords that don't actually get used yet. They're just there for either flavor or for future expansion. But like with Dathomirian, which is a great example, we know that there could be more Dathomirians. We haven't gotten there yet. And we don't necessarily have a plan for when we'll get there, but it's there. And so what we do there is we say, okay, let's make sure that this keyword is really functional and important to the things that we're designing it with. And that if we never released anything with Dathomirian again, it would still feel cohesive and necessary or useful to the game, right? There's a new one that's coming in the box I think Kit Fisto had it first, but with Rick Tamsin and his Aquadroids and Osiri, right? They have the aquatic keyword, which obviously is going to be pretty tight and limited to just a few things. Like I said, I think Nader Veb and maybe Kit Fisto wound up hitting it as well. But that's another one where it's like, okay, we know that there's not going to be a lot of aquatic things, but there's a potential to be, right?
Yeah.
And so let's design this. And that box is really tuned around maximizing that aquatic. So when you take them, you are kind of incentivized to take all the aquatic stuff together. But when you do, you don't feel the pain as much when you have to when you have to make your other squad not aquatic, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes we will engineer a keyword that we think will be very limited to certain characters or units to be slightly more efficient if it's together than we would with a term like Clone Trooper, which is you're going to have so much chances to maximize it. We know it's going to be so broad. So we can kind of afford to make abilities that may be a little softer or benefits that are a little softer because it's fine.
Yeah.
And then you also look at things like the Dathomirians and stuff like that, and you say, okay, how do these plug in when you're not trying to utilize a very limited keyword? And do they still have other things, right? Do they have spy? Do they have force user? Do they have these things that may allow them to be taken in other mixtures I think that's another really fun one too. Spectre is really interesting because the Spectre keyword, or even the Bad Batch, although there's no more Clone Force 99 stuff, Spectre gives you that extra boost where we used it to make it so that if you play the thematic pairing of the entire Spectre team, you get more out of it, but most of their keywords still trigger off of like Rebel Alliance or Spy or things like that. So you can do cool things like take the Death Star Escape Squad, which has a lot of Spy in it, and I love that one because it doesn't all share Rebel Alliance, right? Because Han and Chewie aren't part of the Rebel Alliance at this point. So instead of using Rebel, like you would commonly think you would for those characters, we use Spy instead.
Yeah.
And Spy is kind of their through line, which means they work with other spies. Scoundrel's another one that you see that work with too, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is we always look at things in isolation and say, if we never did anything else, do we believe that this is a healthy and fun addition to the game? And then from there, that gives us the freedom to know that when we expand it later, that can be whenever we want, but we're not releasing something that feels half done.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I noticed like we released the my kind of scum, the bounty hunter box, and then the lineup that I walked past to get here for the Jedi Temple with leader Fulcrum as the leader, and then Anakin Vader as the secondary. So like moving those roles around a little bit and doing different things there. And like obviously the bounty hunter box had no primary there's a scope for more of those style, but like
I think, yeah, absolutely.
Support roles or maybe giving us a Captain Rex leader and
I mean, and I think that there's we always intended to show characters at different points of the story. Like there are definitely episodes where Captain Rex is the main character, right? The Umbra arc is a great one.
Yeah.
Where he is the one that you're watching he takes over for an Anakin and Ahsoka, right?
Yeah.
And his conflict with Pong Krell and his difficulties with like how the Republic is treating the clones. So I think every character has the ability to be a primary. Every primary character has an ability to be a secondary supporting, right?
Yeah.
And Han and Chewie are kind of a great example of that. They've run the gamut at this point of all the different slots because the way that I like to think about the overall game design when talking about squads and how characters slot in where is you're trying to create just what's the story, right? And who's in the lead. So in this is some rescue box, Leia clearly in those scenes is she literally tells them, she's like, you don't know what you're doing. I'm in charge now, right? You do what I say. And so she's clearly the primary. And Luke and Han and Chewie kind of fall into those other slots. You have when Anakin's around, Captain Rex is typically like the secondary character in the show. He's supporting him. Yeah. But when Anakin's not around, there's 100% a reason for those clone captains to take the lead, to be in charge.
Yeah.
Ahsoka's another one, like she can slot back and forth. So that's a really exciting thing from a design perspective because it means that you can always come back to these characters and emphasize other aspects or other storylines that may be fan favorites or something that you really enjoy or that have cool things that you can do in the game. And being able to explore multi-facets of characters is one of the most fun parts about skirmish games and games like Shatterpoint because they really allow you to do that and they allow those things to have additional value, right, to players and how they build, especially in the squad building for how Shatterpoint works.
Yeah.
Having access to different primaries, different secondaries, even if they're the same character, can bring out a lot of different strategies and tactics for how you're approaching the game.
Yeah. That's cool. So I've got just a question to kind of quote. Right. I know you only arrived on Tuesday and via a long day and I'm pretty busy. Have you had chance to kind of settle into any of the local cuisine, like tikka masala being
no, bitch? I'm kind of blown away by the fact that there is not a curry house within like the realm of the convention hall we're in. So I've not made it to Birmingham because that's like a 30-minute train ride and it's just been slammed from like morning to night. I have though on my other trips to the UK, I have been to some exceptional curry houses.
Yeah.
It's the 1867 chicken, I think.
Wow.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
So and that I think that makes sense for the UK. It was developed for King Charles. Yeah. I think is the story. I might have my monarchs wrong there because I'm not a UK native, so I don't know all of it. But so that I love that. At the show, we've had some Italian. We've had a lot. There's a really great Japanese fried chicken place in like the mall complex. That's the food mall complex that's nearby. Karage. So we've eaten there a couple of times. It's been excellent. and then just like random show food. But no, I haven't. This is not probably going to be the trip where I get to go out and try another curry house or do things like that.
Yeah.
But my other trips, I've always been taken to a curry house because you got to do that when you're in the UK.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris.
And hopefully we'll get you back on again.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah, we'll do a private garrison, and then I'll try and Holy Plumber to come on. Get some Shatterpoint going.
He'd love to come on, I'm sure. So absolutely, just reach out to Ross. We'd be happy to come on.
Yeah, and thank you, and hope you all enjoyed that, and see you again soon.